Welcome to Life on Life's Terms. This is your host, Justin. We have the owners of Modern Gravity in the studio today. The topics that we are going to jump into is how Modern Gravity started, the work environment at Modern Gravity and what that looks like, and then the experiences of floating and how Modern Gravity is different than other places that you might have gone to or you have not yet experienced. Mm-hmm. So how is the day, guys? We have Matt and JP. You know what? I'm gonna
AJ, TJ.
Yeah, I'm
PJ.
gonna fuck that up more than once.
Okay, man.
I think it happens so often.
It happens every other day. It's just like,
hey
RJ, how's it going?
Yeah.
I'm like, RJ's doing good today.
you know the fucked up. So my initials is JR.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever called me that before ever in my life,
No?
and I'm so like the whole nickname thing or whatever. Yeah, it just kind of.
Well, people think he's like Jean-Pierre or something
People think I'm
all the
French,
time because it's like JP Phillips. It's like no, it's like Jamie Phillips and his nickname's JP.
Yeah.
But
mothers.
So
that's why I have a fleur de lis on my arm so that everybody knows I'm French.
Okay.
And they can treat me like an asshole. Okay. I mean, it's my duty not to perpetuate the stereotype of being an asshole French.
But people can just deal with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When it comes out, I mean, fuck, I'm human.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it'll happen. I mean, I'll make amends to you tomorrow. It's all right.
But right now,
Yeah,
Exactly.
assholes coming out. I wear it on my sleeve. All right, so let's get into how Modern Gravity started.
ooh, that's a fun conversation. It's also funny how there's so many things that like we can talk about that I'm like, if we actually try to put a number on the amount of times that we've had this conversation, whether it's somebody coming into the studio, a friend, somebody new that you met on a podcast, and how just every time, at least I talk about it, I'm like, what a weird world. But how did it start? Well, when I came home one day when JP and I were living together, and it was essentially always trying to start a different business or always trying to get into something because just the idea of having a job, like really tried to lean into having a job, and it was just always so uncomfortable for me. Mm-hmm. So the idea of always coming up with like weird business ideas or concepts, and I mean JP has been through those with me for a lot of the different things.
Oh, yeah.
And anyways, I just came home one day when JP was just gaming, had some time off work when he was working up in Fort McMurray, just not really enjoying it as much, and he can kind of speak to that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah.
But
I definitely will, don't worry.
Yeah. You can talk about that for an hour.
Yeah.
But the idea is, I came home and I was just like, hey, do you want to start a float tank business? And
This
just like,
is pretext, like that's the quick way. There was weeks and months of conversations beforehand, just like preparing and talking about how we would actually go ahead and start it up. So the initial idea was to start it up in the house.
Okay.
And then the initial idea was actually to start a brick and mortar location. And then the good kind of like way to get into that was actually starting in the house in the basement. So we got the measuring tapes out and legitimately just went downstairs and started measuring out which room works the best. And it turned out to be the laundry room.
in the basement.
In the basement, aka the renovated float center. And then we kind of started up. I'd actually never floated before actually like putting a bunch of money on buying that tank actually. And a lot of that came from just going back and forth with Matt and the trust of, diving into something new, but at the same time, you get that gut feeling.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh, this is what I need to be doing. Like, cancel everything else, just dive right in almost, right? And the gut just told me, it's like, yep, like, this is what you're looking for. Because at the same time, I was working up north. I couldn't stand it. I'm a millwright by trade. And, I just hated every minute of going up there.
So what did you hate about having to go out there? Because I think like a lot of our listeners are from America, right? So I'm just going to set up the context of like so I've worked in the oil field, but that world is basically going up to a camp, living in a room no bigger than a cell
Yeah.
that you have a key to, and your isolation is like hours upon hours on some dirt road to the closest town that's still only 80,000 people big.
Yeah. Like,
We were also born and raised in Fort McMurray.
Yeah, we were
as
born-
Oh, that's
well.
a tragedy.
Yeah,
right. Very
So
much.
there's the additional context to him choosing to go up there, right?
There's the
Yeah.
cherry on top.
Like
of
we
the
know
cake.
so many things, right?
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing the biggest thing I hated about it was like, it was the inefficiency. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
I can't stand. I'm not a person that wants to like. Money's not the determining driving factor of why we get into certain things.
Yes.
And going up there, I was doing it for money. Like I was doing it so I can say, hey, while this is here, I'm going to try and get a piece while it's here. I can, right? And when I got up there, I'd sit 7 days with 20, 30 other guys in a trailer doing nothing, getting paid 10 hours a day. And then you get on the bus, go there, do nothing, maybe get up and walk around the site if you're allowed to do that. And then they go back to the trailer for the next 4 or 5 hours. Then you bus back to the camp, go back to your cell, go to the gym, work
Yeah,
out,
yeah.
So
eat a bunch
Yeah.
of like weird steaks that they had, and then like go to sleep and do it again for a week.
Yeah.
And I'd be up there for maybe 2.5 weeks at a time, and a whole week of it was just doing nothing. And I was like, this is stupid. Like, I get it, take the paycheck and run, sure, if that's like your mentality, but like I just felt I was wasting time. I was like, I'd rather be doing something like contributing to the world some way in life versus taking a paycheck sitting with people that I really don't get along with. And is bullshit. So I was just like, yeah, where's my out? What's something else I can get into? What am I interested in? And I just went on this huge searching spree of just everything, from helicopter pilot to like civil engineering tech to like electrical engineering tech to like 2-year courses at NAIT.
turn of alternative
Yeah,
energies and stuff like that.
renewable
renewables.
energies. I really got into like energy production and consumption, like what the world is actually going through right now in terms of energy and like why it's good, why it's bad, what we need to do. Looking into nuclear fusion, fission. Like I just learned so much about different things. And it's funny because my plan initially at the end of it, before we kind of started talking about the whole float center, was actually to go back to school, probably take a 2-year course. But to do that, I needed to go back to work, save the money up, so I wouldn't, be stressing out during school.
Yeah.
If I need the time off, I could pay bills and I go work in the summer. That was my plan. And then, gut feeling kicked in as soon as I heard about what floating was. And you've been doing it since
Like
you were
08,
a young little tot back
a
in the
young
day.
little
right?
tot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the old lady's house in Red Deer.
Yeah, like my first float was just sheerly for athletic recovery, and I used to do every time after training doing weightlifting, I'd go home and do like an ice bath and an Epsom salt bath. And again, I thought I was such a fucking badass when
Yeah.
I'd put like 6 cups in there. I'm like,
Yeah,
whoa,
yeah.
so much salt.
Going above and beyond.
Yeah.
Right.
And then of course, like you start to understand the context of floating, which I mean, back then, I don't even think Joe Rogan was talking about it as much, or he might have just started that same year
Yeah.
more on his podcast. But I had no idea, even like floating started to get coined as the term floating to be a little softer and a little bit easier on
Yeah.
just your general population
Versus sensory deprivation.
Yeah.
which I still love
Yeah,
the term
yeah.
sensory deprivation, right? Like the idea of depriving senses to enhance your senses.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I guess even from my own personal experience, so we were talking about that with Kenny, who's the other co-host on the show, about sensory deprivation, because he was like, what's this floating thing? I was like, well, it's sensory deprivation. It's a sensory deprivation tank. However, your senses aren't really deprived of. You can still hear, you can still feel, you can still see, you can still taste, you can still smell. All of that is there. The difference that it becomes deprived of is you don't know what's up or down at a certain point. You don't know what's side to side. You don't actually know where you are in the room and the
There's like
lights are
kinesthetic
off.
awareness.
Yeah. So yeah, that whole sensory deprivation tank, I think, is a little bit misleading, only in the context that people might acknowledge that it's their eyes, their hearing, and all that stuff.
That's a cool part though about floating, is that, the dichotomy that exists
Yeah.
between pulling everything away
Yeah.
to feel more,
Yeah.
and how if we do that more in our everyday life, and I mean that's the beauty of floating, right?
Yeah.
We sell things as relaxation, but there's this beautiful thing that can happen when it's like, oh, you're stressed. Yeah, this is kind of weird, but we do it really modern. Everything's beautiful. It's all cool. Just come in and relax. Nothing crazy or spiritual is going to happen. You're going to be the same person when you come out. And sometimes that's not the case. People
Yeah.
come out and they ask themselves a question, or they thought about something they didn't want to think about, and you can't unthink that shit.
That's actually what happened with this podcast. So it was Kenny's first experience at Modern Gravity. It was also my first experience at Modern Gravity. This was, I think, the 5th time I had floated in my entirety. And I was sitting in the tank, and I was contemplating like what the hell am I doing? You know, because I've got many different business ventures, and I realized you're not spending enough time on the podcast. You're not putting enough into it, and I came out of that and I realized, you know, the in-kind trade that the podcast has gotten from the sponsors, so on and so forth, has been magnificent. So for me to gloss over that and not see that as some sort of value that's coming out of this was ridiculous. And then again, to speak back to what you're talking about in Fort McMurray, that's a life of depravity. We're depriving society in order to gain a financial income. Yet here on the podcast, we've talked about this many times. How do you contribute to the stream of life to the best benefit that you know possible?
Yeah.
And so I found the podcast is one of the best ways of contributing to life without hostage taking anybody, saying you need to listen to me, because ultimately everybody who's listening to this show has said, yes, I would like to listen to this.
Yeah, it's a
Choice.
Right? So it becomes a choice, and then you get to see the different intellect, so on and so forth, right? Like you guys aren't saying floating is the only way to relax. It's a choice to come and see what it's like, what's going to happen from it, right? So
Yeah.
I think when you get into that mindset of how can you contribute to society, how do you contribute to the stream of life the best way you know possible?
And it's your choice.
Yeah, man, it's a whole new world opens up, right? Because it's not the economic, financial security that you're really looking for. What ends up happening is that becomes secondary to, I just love doing this. Like the podcast is my favorite job throughout the week. You know, this is the best one.
That's awesome.
Out of all of them, right?
Yeah.
So
Really cool.
not that I don't like the other ones. I mean, I guess I'm just a little bit biased of where they are in the line.
Yeah, you prefer it. Right?
Yeah.
Well, and being aware of that line, I think, is something people don't really want to talk about all that often. That there are favorites, there are priorities. Although you know, the idea of priorities is like one thing, but we do have those important things in our life. But being able to have the self-awareness around like, what do I enjoy the most? What do I enjoy spending my time with? And that shifts and adjusts. But just ignoring it isn't helping anybody, right? Including yourself.
So the athletics that you were involved in, Matt, what kind of athletics was that specifically?
Well, it was weightlifting, probably more commonly known as like Olympic lifting. So doing snatch and clean and jerk and things like that.
Excellent.
Played a lot of baseball growing up and stuff. And I think that gap between high school to then kind of early 20s, I was missing that kind of competitive nature, and felt that I was like kind of good at it, or just like I had the body type for it. And because I was doing all those baths back and forth, I'd have some kind of, you don't really have teammates, but people you train with from like here and there would just like joke around and call me bath boy and stuff like that, even though they're like, no, it actually really helps. Like, we're just making fun of you, because I was just so into it. And I also enjoyed the mental aspect of like an ice bath, like almost getting excited for it and getting like an endorphin rush when doing it. And that's even like Wim Hof and stuff like that. It's something I eventually got into, and I was like, oh, this is like some really cool shit. Anyways, it was, I don't even remember who's like, you know, sisters, boyfriends, aunts, grandmother. I ended up in Red Deer in this old lady's basement. She was like, I think in her 80s, and her husband had passed away the year before.
Okay.
And so they had this beautiful home, and they had this tank that they had made in like the 70s and 80s during the whole initial spark of floating. You know, floating's been kind of started to get, or sensory deprivation with John C. Lilly was kind of coined in the 50s and 60s and started to get more popular. And eventually they had like these lay down commercial versions that you started to see all around North America and Europe in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So I went down here just expecting an Epsom salt bath. I was like, 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt, that sounds way better than 6 cups.
Yeah, no kidding.
And I'm like, and I'm usually somebody who like will research everything before I even attempt to do it.
You want a job on a podcast?
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, I did not apply that at all in this situation. I was just like emotionally like, oh, 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt bath sounds great. So I think in my head I had this idea of some like bathhouse in Budapest type thing where I'm just going to go lay down in the salt, and that's what the main thing was for, right?
Yeah.
That's why it existed, is for my athletic recovery.
Yeah.
And so eventually I get to this woman's house, and like a typical 20, 21-year-old athlete, she's like, oh, have you done this before? I'm like,
Of course.
of course I have. Like, who hasn't? And brings me down to this basement, this unfinished basement. This beautiful home, by the way, but this unfinished basement with this like coffin-like treasure chest box. And like you were talking earlier before we started about us having like larger rooms and everything's this beautiful shiny fiberglass and starlights on the ceiling. This thing was like wooden, and you had to like shimmy it open from the middle. Like you couldn't just open it because the wood would like get caught. So you had to like shimmy it open. And I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, this is horrendously irresponsible. So after having a shower and then like walking down like from the middle floor down to the basement in this robe that was just not fitting me, I climb into this tank and I have to like reach out and like pull like a little light.
Thank God you said light.
Yeah. Very short rope. But yeah, I had to like pull a little thing for like the light, and then but still hold onto the tank so I could get into the tank without it being pitch black. And anyways, laid back and started to float. And I thought it was really strange because like when I first sat down, you could feel like kind of like it felt warm on the bottom of the tank, yet the water felt very cool in a way, or neutral. At the time, I just felt initially it's cool.
Yeah.
And then when I laid back, I floated, and I was like, what the hell's going on? And then I kind of started to reverse engineer the experience where I'm like, oh, the salt is simply a means, like, oh, science, Matt, that's great. If you put enough salt in something, things float. So then I started to reverse engineer. I was like, well, and since there's like intentional heat, but like the temperature is meant to be like this, I started to reverse engineer the whole aspect of like depriving my senses. So initially I went there just for the feeling on my body and knowing what it did for my joints and skin and muscle and blood flow and everything like that. And then this started to kind of kick into gear of being like, wow, this just feels serene. Mm-hmm. And after laying around for what I thought was like 30, 45 minutes, because like I didn't want to stay there forever, even though she said like, take your time. And as JP and I know from floating people and asking them if they want some extra time when there's nobody afterwards or something, I now understand the context of that. It's like, yeah, go in for a few hours if you'd like. But for me, I was like, I don't want to overstay my welcome. I did drive all the way down to Red Deer. I don't mind staying.
So you actually drove from like Edmonton or Fort
Yeah,
Mac
totally. And my mom was living just outside Sylvan Lake at the time. Like I just
okay.
planned to go for dinner and hang out afterwards. It wasn't like just that, even though later on when I kept going back down, it was specifically for that because of how I felt. But yeah, laying in the tank, what I thought was about 45 minutes. And then I had this little, the only way I can describe it is like you have this like long piece of film and then you're just watching the film and at some point there's like a little, like something popped out. And I don't know how much film was taken out. Like it was kind of like it's snipped and edit, and I don't know how much film was taken out of it. And so I was perceiving the experience at about 45 minutes, let's say. And by the time I actually got out and checked my phone, which at the time I had like a flip phone with little buttons and I got salt in it and just completely destroyed it. I was in there for over 4 hours.
Wow.
And had no idea what the hell just happened.
Wow.
On the drive home on Highway 2, it was like, you know, sun setting, just like kind of, I'm just like loving everything about it.
Yeah.
And I'm watching these like little birds, like geese, like float or like fly down like pretty close to some kind of like little mustard field or whatever. And then suddenly I feel like a vibration through the steering wheel. And I was like, oh my God, this is like orgasmic. And then I realized it's the little pieces on the side of the road because I'm like driving off the side of the road.
Yeah.
And then I just had to like slow down. And I remember just laughing. I'm like, this is ridiculous that I am not on drugs. I am not sleep deprived. I am feeling good. And simply laying in this like box for a few hours has completely changed my perspective.
Yeah. How many floats did it take for you to recognize that this was the thing that you needed to do? Like when did you come, how many floats, I guess, did it take for you to come to this idea that you needed to talk to your then roommate?
Oh, years and years and years and years later, like 6 years.
Oh, wow.
Maybe it wasn't so much like I think just how my brain worked even in my teens and early 20s, like I guess you could say from an entrepreneurial perspective, I definitely thought about it, but there was no other real centers that were around, hence having to do in people's basements. I had so much going on with like, you know, sports and having that in my head, right? So it was definitely something I was aware of, but the kind of lack of information and support, it just wasn't something that I was like immediately clicked into as a business. And it wasn't until like years and years later, which would have been end of 2015, Well, it would have been
No, 2013.
would have been end of 2013 that I kind of put a little bit more energy into looking like the financials and the business model and things like that. And there's a couple places, around Canada that were starting to open up.
Utah,
just-
it's huge, eh? Down like Colorado, it's massive. It's like
Well, Vancouver is even bigger.
Really?
Yeah, Vancouver for a while there was like the headquarters of like floating.
Like the Mecca almost.
Yeah, just like there's so many per capita there.
Wow.
But yeah, and so through that though, it was just like doing a little bit of research, and then eventually started talking. JP kind of knew that I was like looking into it, and then eventually I was just like, do we want to do this? Do you want to do this? And yeah, so it wasn't until like 6 years later.
Yeah.
What's mind blowing about it is you're the guy who's floated for so many years.
Yeah, this guy's
then-
didn't even float.
And then you haven't even floated, and you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, fuck it, we're in.
Absolutely.
Right? Like,
Absolutely, man.
like that's pretty contrasting from the two.
Yeah.
You know
But it's
what I
also
mean?
an
Like,
insane level of trust. Like I think about that. I'm like, what's wrong with you? And I love you for
A
it.
lot of things are wrong with me, man.
Like I'm just like, that's amazing.
Oh,
That's
no.
amazing.
so the center that you guys have now, is that the first place that you guys were at, or did it actually start in the basement?
I started in the basement of the house that I'm in now, actually, with my girlfriend. Yeah, like back in 2014. Ended up buying the tank. I actually floated for the first time because right before we opened up in the house, we went on vacation. So there was like a group of our friends that went over to Europe and stuff, and Iceland, Germany, London, and Amsterdam. And I actually ended up floating for the first time in London with one of my good friends. And it's funny because I think it's both of our first float experience, and they got out, and I was like, okay, cool. I'm glad that I spent all that money changing my life to get into this now.
So you had already spent your money.
Yeah,
Never
already.
been in the tank.
Never
yet,
been in a tank before. I already.
And it took you going to London to get into a tank.
Yeah.
Like the tank arrived just before we left.
The tank arrived, and we put in pieces in the basement just before we arrived. And but yeah,
Oh my god.
it just goes down. It just goes down to that weird gut feeling, and you kind of trust. You trust that intuition, right? Like it's the same thing. I think that kind of leads us through the right choices in life that we want to kind of end up in certain situations. It's just that gut feeling that it just made sense. It made sense for me knowing I didn't want to go to school at the time, and knowing I didn't want to go end up working for another place that would be inefficient and I wouldn't get along with the boss or people I didn't like. Like my whole work experience since I moved to Edmonton, and really actually my whole work experience in general, I wouldn't say it's been like the most positive. It's been definitely on the more negative side.
Yeah.
When I think about a lot of places I've worked at. And I mean, you have a mix of both. There's pros and cons to everything, right? I'm not going to trash talk every place I've worked at. There's a lot of places that were good, but just knowing I didn't want to go back into that same routine just didn't suit me. So I was like, when you asked, and I was playing GTA, Grand Theft Auto 5, I was
He's
like,
great at the game, by the way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty good back then. Yeah, you get some good thumbs action.
So is it kind of like you know how just like from my, I don't know, like we all remember this one significant thing in life. You know what I mean? For instance, for me, I remember when Princess Diana died.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
I remember where I was, that whole entire thing. And for one of my businesses, one of the not-for-profits I'm involved in, I remember what, like you were saying, I was playing GTA, but
Yeah.
I can go further than that. Like I remember like the sun, the like almost that moment of epiphany.
That's like
And I'm
a-
like,
Inference point, I think it's called, or something like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So is it almost like kind of like a mark
Oh, yeah.
on you? Like it's like, yeah, at that particular moment, it's like I arrived.
Yeah.
You know?
You have a few of those, you can probably count back in life. There's like almost like key moments that kind of almost change a perspective or a way of thinking. Like you're saying, I got into the tank and my perspective shifted. And it's like, I might have gotten, like we wouldn't start hanging out if one of my old ex-girlfriends didn't break up with me and buying a motorcycle because I was a broken small man right at the
Yeah.
time, right? And like that's how we started hanging out. So it's like those same points and like inflection points, I think it's called, that you can kind of trace back throughout your times of life. And it's just like, yeah, you can definitely remember those scenes in your brain about, oh yeah, when this happened, it led to this, and then this point led to that, and then this point led to that, and like there's filler in between, but like those specific times, absolutely.
Well, and even not just in the moment, but years leading up to it that you didn't realize were so vastly important
Yeah.
Yeah.
to even being in the situation to have the opportunity to have another one of the experiences like JP playing GTA and me just coming in the house and like the door still kind of being open with my shoes still on, like just leaning over this like little ledge.
Or
and
the,
being like,
the reason that we actually lived together in the first place.
well, I mean, that's what I was just
right?
gonna say. Is years and years before, like I was living with a girlfriend, and she cheated on me, and I then was like, well, you know, this can't continue anymore. Like trust is one of the biggest values that I have in any relationship. And I phoned JP and I'm like, yeah, man, I need a place to stay. Like, do you think your parents would mind if I stayed for a little bit? And even at the time, like that was kind of like a pretty big no for especially for extended periods of time of just like, hey, this is a place for you guys, or for you and your brother. And like, you know, as much as you love your friends, maybe it's not a great option. But given, you know, what happened and me needing a little place to stay, your parents were just kind of like, okay, you know, you can stay for a couple months.
Yeah.
Wow.
So anyways, years later, still living there, somehow just like ninja'd in there, and it's just like, all right, well, this continued from a few months to a few years to then, you know, somehow
Starting a business.
and a legal business kind of in the basement of the house, of just like floating people naked and doing their thing, right?
That sounds so strange, just floating people naked.
Well, it is, and it's so
It is,
strange. I mean, people are like, don't you think this is weird? I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
What is not weird about, like, you come to float once, like we do this was our life for 365 in a house, like 1,200 people,
Yeah.
right?
Like you
But-
think they're in the basement alone, and I'm sleeping in the room like 2 meters away.
Yeah.
Right?
Because our sleep schedule is so fucked up. Like
Yeah.
we were floating people from like sometimes like 6, 7, 8 in the morning, and people sometimes hung out till 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning, and there'd be this gap in which a JP would be like going and do laundry.
And laundry till 4 in the morning, like every day for like a year.
Yeah.
Well,
and-
you know, that's the thing though, right? Like when it comes to our business, like the business, we just talked about what we provide into the stream of life,
Yeah.
right? And then, and you were talking about like the way how we become, like when we go work for somebody, it's just an exploitation of who we are.
Yeah.
For people who are entrepreneurs, I think that's the feeling that we have. It feels like an exploitation. So now
Yeah.
you're working way harder for yourself than you would have ever worked for any business ever in the world, and any man, like the man, air quotes.
Yeah.
And now here you are, you know, running yourself almost 24/7 in order to get this thing off of the ground. And it wasn't, I would suspect that it wasn't for the financial gain of the money that you had invested. It's more the fact, like, this is just what I need to be doing. And in order for this to work, this is what I have to do to make this thing happen, right?
Just felt right? And like, I mean, to each their own too. I mean, everybody, if you own a business or work at a business, like, I think that there's definitely like there's pros and cons to everything. So you can do one or the other. Because I have nothing against like working at certain places if that's what you want to be doing too, right?
Yeah.
And you never know what happens down the road. Like this gets better, this gets worse. You don't know. Like gamma ray
There's a risk
burst,
to
right?
everything. Yeah, gamma ray burst. We're talking about gamma ray burst.
Yeah. So like you never know what happens, and then you can end up working for another place, but it could be awesome. You can end up working for another place, be crappy. You can own a business, it could be good. You can own a business, it could be bad. But like, you know, it's this nice. You definitely have that feeling of having the option yourself, having that kind of control over your own life. If I think it feels a little bit it's like exciting. It's a little bit of like a release in its own way of not just doing like the norm, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, it's
What
also
we're kinda
just
told to
it's
do.
also the sheer power of, and why like self-awareness is so important, and is kind of like the bonus is that being in a business that, you know, we're passionate about, that very much facilitates that, even if you're not necessarily somebody who would consider themselves self-aware. But I mean, going back to the idea of Fort McMurray's not all that bad. I know people who have completely abused the system, made a lot of money in a short period of time that they would have never been able to do with the education and work experience that they had, to then invest that into a lifestyle that now they are blissfully happy. Now, is that the common like rule of thumb? No, that is not. A lot of the time you go up there thinking you need to work, and you don't have the financial intelligence or experience to know that you're making this type of money. You don't need to spend this money, or you don't need to lease 3 quads and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I know a half dozen people who went up there and completely changed their life because they were aware of what they were doing and why they were doing it. And so that also falls into kind of a little bit of what JP was saying, which is the idea of if you love to work, like just because you hate a job that you work at doesn't mean you hate working as an employee.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because if that's your only thing that you use to decide whether you should start your own business or work, that's a really bad decision to make.
Yeah.
Because the idea is you might actually really suck and or hate running your own business because it is stressful as all hell.
Sure it is. Yeah.
But it's what feeds you.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas, I joke around with my mom all the time about, I wish that I could actually have a job. Like, I wish I could be super happy in a job where I could stay in my one lane, get super good at one thing, and be a huge value and resource to the company that I'm working for.
Yeah.
Take 4 or 5 weeks vacation a year, have the weekends off, be able to spend time with family and friends in the evenings and not have to constantly have something on my mind, but I would suffocate. Right?
That that comes in. So as this episode comes out, my blog will be out about the new work culture that is coming. So this month is Mother's Day month, basically.
Makes sense.
So
that is coming up, by the way.
Right away.
Yeah.
So
Mother's Day.
so one of the things that I had wrote. So I was raised by a single parent mom. We were talking, and then my co-host currently, Chelsea, she is currently a single parent mom. So we were talking about the work environment from the 80s to the 90s to what it is now. And she, I remember when my mom was putting me in daycare, going to the employer, so on and so forth, they would say to her, "You got a kid? You have to be out of here by 5?" And she was always put into a predicament where she had to pick between her employment, not like the project, but the employment, or picking me up from daycare and also incurring basically a debt because it's like time and a half while I'm sitting in daycare and overtime, right? So that was always the consequence back in those times. And then with Chelsea, what we had basically surmised through that podcast was she can work from home. She has a laptop.
Yeah.
She can devise her lifestyle around her kid. She has 24 hours to get her job done now. She's not confined by an office. She's not confined to have to go somewhere. And so when you're saying to be an employee and be a part of something, basically the way how we structured life on life's terms was I have learned that I do not like doing policy procedure manuals. So
Really?
Yeah, they suck. It's like 4 Bibles thick. Anyways, and plus all the legal crap that you have to do in order to do that. So what we actually did here was everybody's a contractor. And the reason why they're a contractor is because we give them profit sharing in the time that they're on the mic. And the profitability that comes from their blog that's there, they also get to share in that.
Yeah.
But the beautiful thing is they don't hold the litigation piece of being an actual business owner. That's what I deal with.
Much less risk.
That's right. So they still get to ascertain that profit.
Yeah.
So do you think that you work harder if you don't you're not getting a wage? Instead, you get to share in the profit, and it's all by percentage. You do this, this is what you get. So in the model of a publication, it makes a hell of a lot more sense to me to give profitability than say $2 per word.
Yeah.
Right? And then I cap you out by saying 200 words, that's it. So basically telling you,
We're putting limitations on something that
$400, that's all I'm giving you every week.
Yeah.
What the hell's that? When really, if I'm, getting an in-kind on a float or something, well, yeah, I'm going to try to give that to everybody who's a part of it, or if it's swag or whatever the hell it is, right? It just makes more sense to do that. So I think, even as you were saying, that culture is changing. Where I think what's going to end up happening, especially with automation in the future, even I was blown away by your guys' setup, no cash on site. Yeah. It's all by e-transfer or direct deposit out of somebody's account to come in, and you're already set up. The automated setup of people coming in I was like, why the hell aren't more hotels doing this? We're spending so much money with somebody. I'm not saying that it's not nice to see if you guys still have humans at the front desk. You have to have that. But at the same time, it's seamless, the way that it moves. I'm sure it didn't start out like that.
No.
Nope.
Definitely not in the house.
But at this point, it's very seamless. And so I look at that and I'm like,
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's crazy to see what automation and AI is actually doing, because it makes a hell of a lot more sense doing that than actually having somebody copy, cut, paste from this to this and then email people back. And what the hell is that? Like, that's not, and it's cool that we're going to that place and not this place of like ball and chaining it. You know what I mean? Here you go. Here's your test.
And it's very interesting that way, because sometimes you can actually deliver a more personable, reactionary, like on top of it experience by using automation, where a lot of people assume automation means less personal, less emotion, where sometimes it's actually the intention of designing that around the customer experience for making them feel valued is actually by not having a human do it and have it's being aware of what's going on. Because I'm just for clarity as well, is I'm not necessarily saying, like, I do believe that the workforce and the way of business is shifting just with technology, but even what I was just to clarify with the idea of self-awareness is forever and always, and for probably ever and always, there will always be the idea of business owners, people who are creating, taking on the risk, investing the money, and then people helping those people actualize those dreams and ideally be part of them.
Yeah.
So technology and information and stuff definitely changes how that looks, but there's still something ingrained, I think, in each one of us where we are more, we desire more to be a part of something or to build something. And when we kind of don't necessarily match that up as well, we are then creating kind of suffering for ourselves. But I do really like the idea, especially with the hybrid of, saying, hey, you might not want to be a full-on entrepreneur, but here's the lifestyle that you need to have. Let's find a way to build this around it that it makes the most sense for you.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
Like, that's really, really cool.
Well, and like Chelsea's takeaway was, I get to do whatever I want, when I want, how I want, because I'm the only thing that she's judged upon, so to say, is that she accommodates the deadline. That's all that's necessary. I don't really care as a business owner what happens from like 9 till midnight or midnight to midnight. I give a guts what happens. All I care about is on Thursday her blog is written.
Well, like, that's like when you're talking about how inefficient work that you've done and like the stuff that people have doing, you're like, why?
This is a waste of this make work projects, and you see it so often, and it's just like, I don't know. There's better things to be doing in life. The world has too many problems to not be fixing them like today.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't give a shit about this make work project. And I remember times on site like hustling like so harder than anybody. It's just so I could leave. And I'd be like, this is done. Can I leave? And every time that they're just asking like, put your hand up if you want to be laid off. Like, I was always the first to have my hand up.
You know what? I did the same thing in geomatics.
Yeah.
As much as I loved being in the mountains, hiking around and stuff, and they'd be like, layoffs are coming. Who wants them?
Me.
Yo, I'm good for 9 months EI. Shit.
Absolutely.
Let's do
summer's
it.
coming.
Yeah.
Do you have any
I can
idea?
do this.
Like,
I can do this whenever and not have to work.
like hiking season is around the corner. I get to go where I want to go instead of where you assholes want to send me.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
You get the freedom back, right?
So even though that you hadn't floated prior to getting the float tank, did you have a meditation practice prior to?
No, nothing.
Trust, man.
Floating is was my meditation. Like, it goes back to the inflection points. It goes back to those things that, just felt too right to not do. Right. And, I've heard of meditation and stuff, and I've tried it maybe once or twice. I was definitely in a phase of life where I was doing some kind of trippy stuff, and I was like, oh, cool. I want to experience more of like what reality has to offer me. Right. And I don't know. It's just, it's just like you like cheese or you don't. But like your gut will tell you. Like, that's a
great analogy.
That's great.
That's a great analogy.
Is it though?
I've never heard you say that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
That's great.
But I really like cheese. So yeah.
There's a lot going on in that.
There's just a lot of trust, right? It's just like, it just felt right. And I mean, I call it like making a drastic life change. It's the same thing when like this guy over here helped me develop confidence in myself to be able to like live my life the way I want. I have really close friends in my life that have helped me through things that I needed help going through, and just key moments where they said something. I'm like, that's what it is. That's what I need to focus on. My girlfriend does the same thing for me, seemingly every day. that I probably don't realize for certain periods of time, but like she does help me so much. I have a friend in the States. He's helped me through some crazy stuff. Matt's helped me through some crazy stuff. And it's just, you just know that, oh, hey, this is that slap in the face of self-awareness that says, yeah, you need to change the shit up, or else you're just going to fall into the same circle, the same kind of cycle of why isn't this going the way I want it to over and over and over again? And then how do you get out of that? You just make that drastic change. Right?
We actually call that a moral psychic change.
Okay, yeah.
Here on this show. So
That's
it's
a
like
much better term than
it's just like as you're explaining, I'm like, that's a moral psychic change. That's
Yeah.
like when you have to consolidate that everything needs to be changed, and in that consolidation, you're going to lump it all into one bowl.
yeah,
And you're not using the same dough anymore. You've started right from the flour.
exactly.
You know what I mean? You've decided that you're not going to even take a pinch of the dough from the
Hell, you might have got new bowls.
Yeah.
You got a new kitchen.
Got a
You
new
moved.
kitchen.
Yeah,
You're
You're in
in the
Alaska
same
now?
country.
You have bowls of cheese everywhere.
Bears everywhere, man. Yeah. Cooking with bears is just like unreal.
So Matt, did you have a meditation practice prior to your first float?
I did. It was like a combination and it's funny because like, yeah, no, I definitely meditated. I started meditating, using cannabis, floating, doing all different types of stuff, sheerly for athletic recovery. I knew that I wasn't trying to be like, Mr. National, international competition. I just wanted to see how far I could push my body naturally without having to resort to, and nothing against, performance enhancing drugs, but just, it wasn't like, I wasn't that diehard to be willing to go that way. And so I was just trying to find really cool ways of kind of hacking my mind, finding ways that like how powerful is my body, how powerful is my mind, what is that relationship between them?
Yeah.
So I started meditating probably a year-ish before, very lightly, very probably not great, but it was more just doing basics of like box breathing, trying to observe thoughts, putting them in bubbles, and it's not really that unsimilar to how it is now. I'm just much more in tune with how I feel and what I'm going through with that. But probably a year before I started floating, but all that kind of really came in together within the same period of time.
So do you still meditate then without
Yes.
being in the float?
It's so common when people come in, and it's a totally valid question, but people will ask, what's better, meditation or floating? I'm just like, and I just look and say like, talk to a carpenter, what's better, a measuring tape or a hammer or a saw? Or a screwdriver. It's like
They're different
Tools to
tools.
get
it depends.
Yeah.
You need all of them. If you're going to be a master carpenter, if you're going to build some beautiful, beautiful things, you need to have all of them, and you need to have a strong understanding of all of them. And one is not better than the other. It literally cannot exist that way. So the idea of, I find floating is quite often is a very good initiator to make like a catalyst of why people would probably want to incorporate a meditation, even if it's 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at night, 5 minutes in the morning, like just whatever's going to work, and start to incorporate that because it's very accessible. You can access the frequency a lot more. It doesn't cost anything, literally does not cost you anything except 5, 10, 20 minutes of your day. And float, but on that same note, floating is great to let you know what that feels like. I found one of the hardest things for me, and this is just how I learn, is how quickly can I get a sense of what this is supposed to feel like, and then how can I extend that feeling, and how can I practice ways of extending that feeling, any type of skill. But with meditation, it was like, what does meditation feel like? If I don't know what it feels like, it's very hard to find out how I'm going to hit that in an accurate manner. So with floating for myself, as well as a lot of other people that, customers and members, is it something that you're like, oh, this is kind of what it feels like. It's nothing like this crazy thing of your mind just exploding or you just disappearing off the face of the earth, but it is a very serene sense of calm presence. You're not thinking too far ahead. You're not thinking too far behind. You're just there. And when you start to get that feeling of what there is, then you can more easily apply it in a daily routine or every other day or whatever just makes sense, right?
So have you, Jamie, have you started your own meditation practice now that you're in the float business, so to say?
Yeah, like I would say that floating is my modality of choice. like I've now tried yoga a few times. Actually.
Big step from.
Yeah?
Well, no. But
I was gonna be like,
just shit talking over them.
so are we? Are we going to the trauma place?
Yeah. No, it's like floating is that modality. Floating is the kind of meditative practice that I've implemented in my life. I mean, that's why it's such a good idea to kind of open this up. And it's like unknowingly you get into something for maybe one reason and it shifts into something else. That was floating for me, is about the kind of experience. Hey, like, let's go into this tank and experience strange things. And I was like, oh, cool. Right. And then that turns into, oh, wait, I can actually prepare and get rid of that voice in my head, cut down the mental chatter. And that's a huge part. I'd say to go back to the original, like the previous question of, did I have a meditative practice or modality before? I didn't, but I've had experiences in life that kind of took me to a very similar place. The biggest one for me was actually reading that book, Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle.
Oh yeah.
And that was crazy, eye-opening. As soon as I implemented it, I started living life differently, and I could feel it and see it for a period of time. Then I went back to my old shitty routines, and I am who I am. But
we're humans.
Yeah, exactly, right? But yeah, after that, that book and then floating kind of coincide almost, to be able to silence the ego down, cut down the mental chatter. And I'd say that that's the biggest modality I kind of use is a float tank to cut down on that kind of internal dialogue that just can just ravage your life if you let it, right? It's like you're always fighting it. But the minute you don't and you get that clarity, you kind of all seek that out for the rest of your life. You're just like, I can live my life this way. This is who I am. This isn't, all these predetermined societal issues that I've thought about, and I judge myself based on this person. I don't credit myself as much as I should. You cut that shit out, and then all of a sudden you're just like, oh, I'm good. Now what do I want to do? Right? How do I want to conquer the world almost, right?
Yeah.
How do I want to live my life while I'm here?
Yeah.
Before the GRBs come, man. The gamma rays are coming.
Gamma
You never
rays.
know.
As an interesting note to add on top of that, though, as a close friend and seeing him, we've been friends for
Few months now.
few months, but well over a decade now.
Yeah.
And even though we went to high school together, we didn't necessarily hang out all that often. High school was pretty rough for me.
We're
at
both
the end.
introverts.
Yeah, and it wasn't until actually we bought motorcycles together in our 2021
Yeah.
that we're like, hey, you have a motorcycle? It's like, yeah. It's like, me too.
Yeah.
We should hang out. And then we just became great friends.
Yeah.
But what I was going to add on top of that, though, is seeing this guy with music. And I was just having this conversation with somebody at an event a few days ago where they're like, oh, I've never meditated before. Floating kind of scares me. But they're an artist. So I got them talking about their art and their process and some of the most proud moments they've had or pieces, and then got them to explain and talk about and describe how they went from a empty canvas to this piece of artwork that they described. And in so many different ways, they're describing meditation.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's just one of those things that's always challenging of I don't meditate. And it's kind of well, there's absolutely times we felt that flow and felt those different points. And I've even felt very flowy and kind of present, watching him listen to music or play music or just see how he gets into it. It's something I've always been completely fascinated with because I used to think I really loved music. And then I became really good friends with JP and just realized I really, really like music. But this man loves music. And so I think that's a big part of it as well.
That's I think when we find that flow, and I think there are some people who are very fortunate in life where they can provide that environment. When you provide that environment of that flow, it's almost like time just elapses and you have no, realization of how long that's been.
Yeah.
Right?
Your brain's in those theta waves, right?
I play music. And so when I'll get up on stage, I'm a professional musician. And so I'll get up on stage and it's a 3-song set.
Yeah.
3 songs are there. That's my timing. But you see people when they're sitting there watching you on a open mic or whatever, they're almost anticipating that a 4th song is coming.
Yeah.
And they've forgotten. And then you're like, yeah, now I know I did something. I
got in
rocked
there.
it.
Absolutely.
I got you
killed it.
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's learning how to almost use that as a tool again and again and again in order to create that vibe,
Absolutely.
right? And yeah, meditation comes in many different forms. Like
Exactly.
I met a guy who was a professional artist, a street painter in Montreal, a long time ago, and that guy would kind of do that with his characters. Like he'd do the characters on the street,
Caricatures, yeah.
but he would do it like painting, not with a crayon or anything. It was like painting right in front of you. So, anyways, as he was doing that, you get in this time warp as you're talking to him or whatever. And I was like, and that time I was in active addiction. I was like, "Oh man, you smoke weed?" He's like, "No," but I thought totally in that moment that he was stoned. Like
Yeah.
I couldn't, like, when two potheads are sitting in a room, you're like, yeah, the left eye wink or whatever, especially when it was illegal.
Little head nod.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Like everybody knows. Like it's just like that subculture. There's an innateness to it almost.
Yeah.
And I thought that I was catching that of him. He's like, no, I go to AA. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's pretend I didn't say that.
Yeah.
Right? So let me ask you this. How is it that you guys came to the open concept of the float tank? Because there's many different concepts, right? There's the float tank that's closed where it feels all claustrophobic, but you guys have the openness of your tank. I mean, I love it. I've been in other tanks where I just felt claustrophobic.
Yeah.
So was it always like? Did you guys always have this kind of tank, or was there an evolve?
I would be interested in, because we do have like some stories and stuff behind it, and even the funny thing of like trying to reduce the amount of stress when people came into the house. It's like, don't worry, guys, this is just our demo tank. Yeah, and just like prefacing as that, and for whatever reason we had like a drawing of what we wanted to do, like an architectural drawing, so it's kind of like, oh, okay, these guys aren't as weird because they're doing this. But I would be curious, why do you think we went with open tank or like a larger tank?
I would suggest because of the claustrophobia of the other designs. So if there's anybody out there listening who has never seen a tank, I would highly encourage you to go to Modern Gravity's website, because the way how you guys even mapped it out in there, like, I'll put it to you this way. I had some people that I had to buy in to come float, right? Some people personal to me in my life. And I'm showing them the tank there, and they're like, it's like a big bathtub.
Yeah, maybe a little 360 degree thing.
Yeah,
that you can look through.
And so they're like, it's like a great big bathtub. What's the difference between this and my own bath? I'm like, you don't have 1,000 pounds worth of Epsom salt in there, and the water's not cleaned like their water is clean. Like there's a whole bunch of
and
stuff.
soundproofing too.
Yeah.
Like you think your house is quiet until you have no noise happening.
Yeah. And then so like that's what I found. And then I found it was palatable to them when they saw that it wasn't closed in like that. Because I remember trying to explain to people another float tank company here in Edmonton. And I would say, yeah, you got to open up this hatch, kind of like you were saying.
The word hatch is just not really sexy.
Yeah, and you're like, you've got to open up this hatch, and you're going to go in, and you're going to slide into it, and it's going to feel tight at first, but close
so
your
good.
eyes. Yeah, you're going to close your eyes, and you're going to forget where you are.
Yeah.
And they're like, what? I'm doing what? Fuck you. Like that's all.
Or they're like, I fucking hope I forget where I am, because you're using words like hatches and sliding in.
And then you're like, you have to take a shower too. What?
Yeah.
Fuck that.
I'm naked. Yeah.
I'm out. What? Bringing a bathing suit with me? No. You can't do that. No. It doesn't work like that. Fuck you. I'm done.
Exactly.
So when I showed people the room that you guys had, who were complete virgins to floating, it was palatable.
Yeah.
So I would assume that it was palatable, but I'm also interested in the evolution of getting to that place.
100%. Because the big one, just from like a business operations standpoint, is like, I really would rather not spend the time. I would rather invest the time and energy it's required to convince people that they're not going to drown or feel claustrophobic, and focus.
I never even thought of that.
It's a thing that gets brought up a lot, but I would rather reinvest the time or invest the time that we would be spending, or staff would be spending, on convincing people that they're going to feel safe and not claustrophobic, and instead build rapport, build a relationship, hell, make jokes. But just the inefficiency of time being spent on convincing people they're not going to be claustrophobic, when you could just have a room with starlight. Even though I never float with lights on, put stars in there, because you just know, people are going to feel that and appreciate that, and you're reducing objections for something that they might really, really, really need.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like you get rooms to do your customers and your community a service, as well as your staff a service, as well as just not having to continually answer the same type of things over and over for something that's just not an issue.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's being brought up so often, it means it's an issue.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It comes from floating over 1,200 people in like a coffin in your laundry room. That's why we have.
That was the other answer.
I
That's-
like
yeah.
there we go.
I was like,
yeah.
I'll put like the little business side of things and like,
Yeah,
and here's
yeah.
the reality.
Yeah, that's the reality of it.
So is that small then? The first tank that you guys
Yeah,
had?
it's like a samadhi. Have you seen a samadhi tank before?
I may have.
It looks like someone like kicked over like an old school fridge and like cut an angle
Yeah.
on the side, and
Yep.
they just like crawl in. So yeah, when it goes back to hatches and things like that, you step into the tray. Like it worked fine. Works. Shout out to Samadhi. Like good job. But at the same time, like the commercial aspect in trying to run that type of tank commercially didn't make sense. But also, even when we opened up, we didn't think we could get rooms. We're like, we'll get 2 rooms and we'll get pods. Because price-wise, that's what made sense. And then we got lucky, just based on, you know, how many we were getting, that we got a better price. And yeah, we're like, oh, we can actually get all rooms. Cool. Like, didn't expect to do that. Okay, let's plan for this now, right? Yeah, a week later, or like a day later, when we clicked order, the dollar crashed.
Well,
Yeah.
it was when, you mean when we bought the tanks?
When we bought the tanks,
When we bought
yeah.
the tanks, it was on the last deposit payment.
Yeah.
It was like 2 or 3 days later, the dollar dropped from like almost $1 to
Yeah.
like 73 cents or
It was
75 cents.
Crazy. And we're like, I remember reading the news, like, oh, Canadian dollar drops. And I was like,
Fuck.
it's a good thing we bought those tanks.
It's like, did we like do our full payment? It's like we just did like a few days
Yeah.
ago. That would have cost an extra 40, 50 G's
Yeah. It would have just bounced up like crazy. And
that we didn't have, by the way.
inflection points, right?
You know what? I do financial stuff right now, and it's so volatile.
Yeah.
It's so. I hate money.
Mm.
Like I have my last contracts for to help people with finances right now, and once they're up, I'm not diving back into it. I'm just done. I'm out.
Yeah.
It's not. I like it. I like doing it for me, but doing it for other people with other people's money,
Yeah.
I
No interest.
sweat real bad.
It's one of those
every
risk
day.
stresses that
Yeah.
Yeah. So I get it, man. It's not fun having to see the dollar influx, especially in a purchase that size.
Yeah.
But again, we have the saying too here on the podcast, God or odd. Was that God or odd? Whatever it may be, it was meant to be at the end of all of it, right?
Yeah.
Universe is crazy.
It is.
All the ways.
Yeah.
So how is it that you like how much research went into finding the open concept of the tank that you guys have? Like how did that happen? Was it one of those things that just fell in your lap, or how did that go?
After like planning the store for so long, you essentially just knew that you know all the manufacturers, you know what types of manufacturers are out, and there was less manufacturers back then probably than there is now, so there wasn't as much
Much less,
choice. So not having that much choice means you're kind of going with one person or the other, and it's like what makes more sense. And for us, those were the ocean float rooms at the time. Yeah, just because like the other options just they wouldn't pan out. This isn't what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of like simplified. It's actually kind of easy to just say, okay, cool, these are the only tanks we can get because they're the only ones being built that are this way right now that we would want to actually put into our store.
Because I think, the concept of it is like I said, anybody who hasn't seen, go to your website, because just looking at the way how that's done, if a float tank isn't doing it this way, I like even myself just trying to get my friends to come in. I said this was palatable to get them to come in and even try it.
Yeah.
Then the other place where there's the hatch and you're pulling it apart and all that stuff, right?
And very similar to like life, there's certain situations that when we're in a situation, we can either be supremely negative about it and not necessarily come to like, here's the reality. And sometimes it's like, I'm not going to say healthy to do, but sometimes it's required to do when we're going through a really tough time, but you can see the light at the end of the tunnel and you need to kind of convince yourself that this is how it needs to be right now. And we're working towards this. But I know there's so many individuals in the industry, including ourselves at points of saying, do we need to spend this type of money on these bigger tanks, right? Or can we just do pods or can we do just tanks like we had in the house? And there's no right or wrong, but the market's going to dictate that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, 100%.
And the idea of, if you can convince yourself that, well, no, people won't mind. It's like, great. Let's test that hypothesis.
Yeah.
And for us, it was just kind of like, I feel so deeply about the fact that I don't want to test this hypothesis. And this is just the idea that people are going to appreciate it. And it was such a good decision, in so many ways.
You have that one chance to kind of do it as right as possible
Yeah.
off the get-go and plan that out. Essentially, where can
Just
we make
not
the least
deal with it.
mistakes? Because we know we're going to make mistakes. And then stick with that plan as you go through.
Yeah, there's going to be enough bullshit that we would
Yeah.
need to be dealing with, which of course you do. It's business.
Yeah.
It's your startup, right?
Yeah.
That's one thing we talk about all the time. That's one thing that if we don't have to spend the energy on, you can reinvest it. You can
Yeah.
reinvest that energy.
Yeah, and I think that's like from your first 1,200 floats that you had coming into the house.
Yeah.
Did you hear that they were
Absolutely.
It was
so much feedback.
It
So
was the
much.
size.
That's-
It was yeah.
That's why I think we're able to make the studio the way we wanted to now, just because of all the feedback. It's those reviews. It's just what people say. You just hear it, and you know what people are asking for. You know what people want, right? So yeah, it's totally the feedback. It helps out immensely.
Excellent.
Yeah.
It's one thing you hear, like we almost have like 1,000 5-star reviews or something.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It's so commonly that people just mention big rooms, stars, not claustrophobic. And you're like, thank God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's also the idea of it too, which is even if tanks, like getting smaller tank, and of course too, our context of things, we use words and people are like, what? So like small tanks, pods, rooms, just
Yeah.
for the idea of the three kind of major different styles.
For sure.
Maybe you could get away with, like, we were kind of first to market in several different ways, both like online presence, which has allowed us to stay like at the top, and then just being the first to market is always really, really great. But just because you're first to market doesn't mean that you're going to be around in 10 years. And so the
Yeah.
big question was, how do we put ourselves out of business? How do we build something now, leverage the fact that we're taking the biggest risk of getting into this first, and then how do we also plan to put ourselves out of business in 5 years, 10 years, instead of somebody else coming in? Because if we put tanks or pods in and there's nobody else, like nowhere else to float, or everybody else has them, perfect. Nobody's going to care. But what about 5 years from now, somebody opens up the facility we wanted to, but we took shortcuts or didn't invest the
I
time
see.
and money we needed
Yeah,
to?
definitely.
Then they just come in. And even though like I love our members and customers, I'm not sure I would even stick around as a customer there, because you have access to these better tanks and this more beautiful space and this more whatever type of environment. So it was not only like, okay, cool, we are taking a huge risk and gamble on being first to market on a newer, not necessarily newer concept, but that second version of it coming from the 70s and 80s. So we're getting into this a little bit sooner than the majority of float centers have in the last 5 years. But how can we then make sure that we're still in business in 5-10 years? And if anything, in an ideal world, even still a little bit ahead. And that was a big piece of it too.
That's also even like first to market was the plan, and that's not even what happened realistically. I think we're the 6th or 7th place to open up commercially in the city, weren't we?
No, we were second, third, but like when we opened up in the house, that's also what I kind of consider
the
like
house, yeah,
first
that
to
makes
market
sense.
of like we were online, we were pitching ourselves as a commercial
Yeah.
studio and like leveraging the points of first to market. But then technically, as we actually open up commercially, there's already 2 places, one on the south end of the city and one in Sherwood Park, that opened up.
I thought there was a
Yeah.
few more than 2.
No,
No?
everything else opened up after that.
No, okay.
Yeah.
I thought we were like 6 or 7.
No.
Do you kind of see? So I have been starting to see down in America, float companies starting to branch out like gyms.
Mhm.
Like how you have physical gyms where like a franchise owner basically buys the name, and then they put all of the same equipment, and then the brand name basically buys all of that equipment at a wholesale and then dispenses it out for people to buy in. Do you see that happening more so in Canada as well with the floating companies, or do you think they're all going to be individually without franchising out?
We definitely saw places kind of open up franchise route and go down that kind of path. I mean, it can work for some places and it can work for some type of businesses, but it all kind of depends on the market too, right? Like I know a lot of places that were opening up beforehand, the first thing they want to do is franchise, expand. And when we opened up, our plan was to say, I remember having the conversation like, oh yeah, for 6 months, like 6 places in Edmonton, like next 12 months, like all over the west coast of Canada, like maybe a year, like all over Canada, probably in Iceland, just like
where can't we open these?
You think you're just
the
gonna,
moon? Let's go to the moon.
Yeah, open up. Left,
they
right,
already
center.
float.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And at the moon.
Yeah, realistically, you know what I mean? Gravity's doing the work up there, right? The lack of, but yeah, like I know I think the conversation we have generally is usually like, it depends kind of how you want to go about doing things, and I feel like I personally feel like when you're franchising, there's a degree of like, I don't want to use the term selling out, but I'm going to use the term selling out. So
I'm going to use it anyways.
Yeah. So like there's a degree of selling out in the sense of like, what are you in that franchise for? Are you in it to expand your business and share your service to more people because you think it's important? Or are you just trying to get money from your franchisers? That depends on who's running the franchise in the first place, right? And some work, some don't. So I don't know.
What's the intention and what's the focus?
Yeah, what's the intention and why are you doing it in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest thing I would see. So
Yeah, I mean, I can see both concepts in regards to like, I mean, if you look at McDonald's, they're just depravity of society, in my opinion, in the degree. And I mean, I'll take the hit publicly for that. That's fine with me. But they endorse obesity in a nonchalant way. Their food isn't all that healthy for you, so on and so forth, right?
All that healthy.
Yeah. So we'll
Understatement.
So we'll say that. But then on the same hand, I've seen a gym, and I'll give a shout out to them too, Evolve Fitness here in the city, where their biggest concept is it's a one-stop shop with dietitians, the trainers, all of the equipment, so on and so forth that's in there, and all cutting edge equipment. And so like if you're working with the government, for instance, a dietitian cannot speak to a doctor without you signing a FOIP contract. Yeah. Well, in Evolve, your dietitian can speak to your trainer, and your trainer can speak to your physiotherapist, and your physiotherapist can speak to your massage therapist. So they're all in the same place, right? Mm-hmm. So you see them franchising out. And as they're franchising out, I would suspect the reason why they're doing it is because the concept of what they're doing is what they're trying to disseminate and spread and propagate with many different people. Because in my opinion, I think that's the only way to train at this point. Mm-hmm. You go to Gold, nothing against Gold, it's a great gym, but all it's got is a bunch of weight pile. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They've got trainers, which is great, but they're trainers who are like, let's rip your fucking arms off today. Yeah. You know what I mean? Whereas at Evolve, they're like,
if you're not bleeding through your nose, you're not lifting hard enough.
Yeah, if I see you here in 3 days after today, I fucked up. Like that's the trainer's thought in the back of his head, right? I can't afford you to come back the next couple days. I'm booked. Yeah. Right? Like, so that's what I mean. I agree with you in the franchise piece, but I think that's also what we as business owners kind of push through.
Yeah,
right. Like it's almost like we're a monocle, or like back and forth, that symbiotism. That happens.
Like I think JP touched on some really good points.
Thank you
about what those pieces are. So I won't continue on with that. But like the more like kind of the macro view about anything, including franchising or business, is like what makes a business in the same industry succeed or fail when they're doing exactly the same thing. Mm-hmm. Intention, focus, what they decided to do at the beginning, what you're willing to bend on, what your values are, where your integrity lies, how you treat people, how you lead. And so when it comes into a franchise, you can completely fuck that up. Yeah. And on the other hand, you can also expand and share a feeling, a service, to communities all over the place, that you're actually doing a better job than an individual local business. You can make things more affordable. You can make things safer. You can make things more systematic, right? And in that way, and that applies to anything though. Like look at no further than relationships. Yeah. The idea of getting married or being a couple. There's so much shit that can go wrong in that. Yet why do some people have just blissful, great experiences and great communication, and others it's just like toxic and just terrible for everybody around? They're the same thing. It's just there's all those facets that apply to it. And so that's kind of like life, franchises, business, relationships, anything is just, there's all those factors. I don't think franchises themselves are good or bad.
Yeah.
It's the people leading them and where it's coming from.
Yeah, I don't want to like shit talk franchises.
No.
That was not my intention.
I think it's also
but what I'm saying,
but I do think that's a huge point,
it
because
is.
a lot of them are spreadsheet managed
A lot of them
companies
are-
that are sheerly
they're
for
kinda
profit.
dicey.
and then
Exactly.
and then I think the other thing is too, like if anybody who's got $100,000 and a little bit of a budget for construction can own a fucking McDonald's or a Tim Hortons or whatever, and then next thing you know, you have a really shitty manager, and you have now developed a really shitty work culture.
Exactly.
Right
That's
now you've got some asshole place where your employers are showing up to that franchise business,
Yeah.
and they fucking hate their life and they're just slugging away, which segs me into this other piece about what your work culture looks like at Modern Gravity.
Yeah.
As before the mics went on, I kind of said, I'm interested to know, like, is everybody floating that works for you guys? And like, is there gossip? Like what are some of the things that maybe floating, if they are all floating, has taken away from that work culture?
So I remember saying to Matt, when if I ever had the opportunity to own a business, I'm going to make sure I don't treat people the same way I've been treated working. And that's always been like top priority. I think our workplace culture is actually insanely good. And that's not because I'm here talking about it. That's just because
Don't worry, man. We're going to go talk to one of your girls at the front desk.
Absolutely. Do it. I like absolutely do it. And I'm proud of what we've done. And no, you're not going to have everybody love you. No, you're going to deal with bullshit from time to time. People are people, and we all have our problems, and we all express them in different ways. But like I think it's so good. I think that we put a lot of effort into like listening and being patient and like taking the time to actually make sure we're making the right decisions and not treating people like they're not people, and treating people like they're people and not like they're just, numbered machines that you employ over the masses. Cause, like primary, like in my mind, you take care of your staff because they take care of the company.
Yeah.
They take care of the customers. They take care of the stuff you're doing. They let you know what's going on. Like they're almost the primary focus instead of having the customers. Customers are very, 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 very important. It makes a lot of sense, right? Like go to like a restaurant and like hear the table yelling at the waitress. Is the customer always right then? No, right? But they'll give you feedback and what's wrong. So it's important. But like the staff are the ones that react and experience that good or bad coming in to the front door. So you want to make sure they're good. If they're having a shitty day or somebody came in, they're giving you crap. Like you just need to make sure that your people are taken care of, right? It's always about the team. This is how I honestly feel. So workplace culture, like I think it's, there's always things to improve, right? Like communication wise, like
much.
It can improve a lot of communication. I know I'm not the best at times, right? Like, I'm a little bit flaky here and there. But when I'm told, it like aggravates me. I'm like, I need to do a better job at this, right?
Yeah.
And you shouldn't, I always believe in the term, like you shouldn't have to go to a shitty job to go to work. You should, like, if you're living your fucking life and you're stressed out and your job sucks and like, that the end is coming eventually and you don't want to spend your time doing some bullshit for some asshole, like, fuck that, right? Like, find something else, the opportunity is there, and it's not there for everybody, but like, if it is, take that step and like treat yourself better. You don't deserve to live that shitty life. You don't deserve to bring work home with you. And I hate that the most. That's like the biggest like gripe, it rubs me the wrong way when I hear about how people get treated at their jobs. They're there to earn a living and like enjoy their life because of the money to make, do a job for your company and like call it a day. No drama, no bullshit, right? Just do your job and like, and hopefully be happy doing it, but create the environment so they can in the first place. It's huge. It's a huge deal for me, actually. Yeah, so I'm very confident in our workplace culture.
Yeah, we don't always do things right, but we try to make everyone feel as supportive through that as possible, right? Because like if you don't, or if you have to for whatever reason, because of course you see how people do treat their staff at either all different types of industries and businesses. And a lot of them local businesses too. It's not even like you can blame the franchises. It's like sometimes local businesses is like, it's a person and you know it, and that's how it is.
It's a people problem almost.
Yeah. And I mean, if it came down to it, where it's like you need to yell at staff and make them feel inferior, or you need a culture that's predicated on kind of fear of fucking up versus the, hopefulness of being a part of something bigger than yourself, and you need to be negative and you need to yell, like, let it fucking burn then, because that's not anything that I'd want to be a part of.
No, I'd quit and go back to work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The majority of your staff, do they float?
Yep.
Yeah. It's actually really cool. And that's actually a tough conversation, because you can't, nor would I personally want to be like, great, so welcome to Modern Gravity. We're really happy to have you here working. You need to float twice a week or we're going to fire you. Right? Like you can't necessarily like push it on there. So part of it is like getting used to the idea of, the importance, and it's like also completely predicated on, action and leadership, right? Like if you don't meditate, or you don't float, or you don't, show levels of patience and understanding and emotional intelligence, why would they want to be a part of that? Mm-hmm. Right? And so if it's something they can start to incorporate in their life because they see what it's doing for the customers and us and the benefits, and they kind of get into that vision, even though there's totally chaos that happens at a float studio, right? It's a small business. It's like a startup. And so, but within that, navigating through and saying like, well, here's some really good points of why this might actually benefit me. And so we've never really had to like force it upon anybody. And the ones that didn't float, it was interesting.
We're fired.
Yeah. We're fired immediately. But no, it just didn't work, right? Like the amount of turnover in a float center is actually kind of interesting, because it's based on, being self-aware and present and happy and all these things, but it's not for everybody. It's an interesting job where you both have to be very specific to attention to detail and cleaning. It's kind of like the spiritual janitor at times, but then also be very present and have good customer service skills. Mm-hmm. And so that is not for everybody. It's actually a very strange hybrid, right? Versus some people are very much more those A-type personalities or more detail-oriented, and other people are just people or people persons. And like being able to kind of find a nice hybrid of that, when you do, they completely blow your mind. But they just naturally float as well. And those people who don't, it just kind of adds into it, and then it's not a right fit for everybody.
See, I learned a little while ago, and I learned this through counseling when I was working in addictions. And this is what I used to tell my clients all the time. Look, you want to tell me your bullshit, but your fucking journal's going to care more than I do right now. You need to tell me what you need out of me in order for me to help you. So I'm going to ask you to write all your bullshit down in a book, leave it in that book, and figure out what the fuck it is you need out of me, and let's get to work so that we can get you the help that's necessary for you. Yeah. Right? So even when it comes to my employees, we don't actually have we have a hub that we meet at, so on and so forth. So it's when and I do not bring my personal life to work at all. And so what I found is the gossip instantaneously stopped when the second that we're not bringing emotions to the table about, oh, this and oh, that. No. Let's talk about what we need from each other in order to make this thing happen. And if you have a need in your personal life, say, I need a laptop. Okay, let's go buy you a laptop this week. You know what I mean? We'll write it off as a business expense. It's done, whatever. But to sit there and bullshit, like to be like, oh, my kid threw the coffee at a laptop. I don't give a fuck about how it happened. I just want you to come to me and say, I need a laptop.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Your laptop's not working? Yeah, it's a tool that you need for work. Let's get to that. And I think we miss that. I think a lot of people, I've seen some very unsuccessful business owners where they become very, very sensitive, and they want that sensitivity of a microculture with all of their staff. And then what I see then is those are usually micromanagers because you should do this. And then they start shooting on their fucking staff. And then once you start shooting, you're not being constructive with your criticism. You're literally just trying to make them a mini you.
Yeah, you're just trying to direct them into what you think is the proper way to do things.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And of course, there's protocol that they have to do. I'm sure, you know, cleaning a tank, there's protocol that has to be done.
Yeah.
However, does it matter if they start with 5 or do they start with 1? Like as long as it
Exactly.
gets done,
Yeah.
you know? And I think that's where, especially business owners, that's where they need to pull back.
Totally. I mean, I'm completely guilty of that.
Yes.
And something that like over the years, like progressively trying to improve, and it's probably always going to be a weak point. But yeah, like really, and again, always coming back to self-awareness of like, well, what's the end goal? Is getting them to do something exactly how you would, or is it for having them feel comfortable, safe, and supported to support the customers, which are generating the revenue and your ability to build and grow a company that will then take care of our lifestyle? Like, what's more important?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Some
yeah.
need to micromanage those
Yeah.
people or not, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's go to personal lifestyle. Quintessential question here on Life on Life's Terms is, what is your morning routine?
You want to start?
Yeah, I had recently actually kind of developed a morning routine, which is pretty dope, and it's very simple the way I like to live my life. I wake up, I try to remember to drink water, brush my teeth, and I just start the day with push-ups.
Really?
And I've been doing that not for very long, like for probably like a month or so. Actually over a month now, I think. But yeah, I just start doing push-ups, and I'll just do one set of push-ups, nothing crazy. I'm not trying to like break records and shit. I'm just trying to get the exercise in, to get the heart rate up and get the blood flowing through my brain. And then if I feel like doing more, I'll do more. If I feel like not doing more, I just do the one set. And it just kind of like, it kind of creates that focus first thing in the morning. It's like that first initial kind of hurdle to get over, to know you can overcome something at the beginning of the day. And beyond that, I try and one thing I always read about in, you know, any kind of business books and stuff, a lot of them kind of say the same thing. Not all of them, and some are really good, but like, and I haven't read a gajillion business books, but most of the ones I read say, you know, affirmations. And then actually when I was floating one time, I just had affirmations come to me. So I got out and I wrote them all down. And then I painstakingly somehow maneuvered the background of my phone to be those affirmations. So the first thing I see in the morning, say when I'm turning my alarm off, or I grab my phone just to turn it on, is more so I'm not really going to go into my phone. I'm going to just load up those affirmations, and I just read them off to myself. I just read the 4, do my push-ups, and then like I start the day that way. And then you never know what happens after that, right? But that's kind of my morning routine right now, for sure. It's not getting on my phone and going on Instagram, which is so easy to kind of do. It's getting away from that, getting rid of that, and then actually getting the affirmations and getting the exercise in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like having something in the morning that you have control over before the potentiating chaos of the world that could ensue.
Yeah.
You know, it's crucial, and there's been times like throughout my 20s that I've had them and not have them, and it's so interesting how it can actually build like longer term understanding and consistency and productivity. But mine's not much unlike that. It's kind of like because my schedule can be so all over the place, it's not so much, and I've tried to experiment with this last year of getting up at like no matter what, like getting up at like 6:30 or 6. But I just found over the course of several months that I wasn't getting enough sleep, and I'm just very aware that I need sleep. Some people can kind of get away with it. I'll just get sick. So I've had it where I get 7 to 8 hours of sleep, like 80% of the time, 89% of the time, get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And then when I get up, I'll get up, and first thing I do is I'll actually mix I'll grind like Himalayan sea salt, a couple grams into a big tall glass of water, mix it up, and then chug that. And then I'll go like wash my face, shower, brush my teeth. Then I'll do some, nothing crazy in terms of pull-ups and push-ups, just enough to get blood flowing and get kind of muscles and posture activated. And then at that point, one of my favorite, like I have some friends who are just like, oh, I'm cutting out coffee. I'm just like, I'm never going to do that. I love it. And I love the process of it. I love the kind of mini meditation when it comes to grinding up beans and pouring them in, like I do French press style as much as I can.
So I started French press. Now I'm back to my Italian mocha.
Interesting.
And if you find that the Italian mocha is bitter, put a little bit of your Himalayan salt in there.
Interesting. Yeah.
And
Never
then
thought about it.
it's gone. As long as you put a little bit of salt in that,
Yeah.
the bitterness is gone.
Cool.
And so I'm drinking cappuccino every morning, brother.
I love it.
Won't
And
go
I mean,
without it
I
now.
actually just super recently, I really now want an espresso machine.
So shout out, because I got to do this. Perfect time to do this. There's a place just down the street from the studio called the Italian Center.
Oh, man.
You go
We
down there.
lived
You
there
go to,
for a little bit.
You go down there. You go talk to Teresa. She's a good friend of mine. That you get nice mocha machine for
I
like
think she
60
floated with us a
bucks.
couple times, actually.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah.
Teresa's amazing.
$60 though.
$60. I got
Nice.
one for 20 bucks.
Oh my God.
You just got to go talk to Teresa. But I mean, I don't know.
I guess
if
the
everybody's-
nerdy part of myself though is just like I kind of want, like, in no financial position to be spending, several $1,000s on an
60
espresso
bucks.
machine. But like
the mocha.
where I was
Shit.
going with though
Yeah.
is because like that's kind of like that little dream and goal of like having this thing that like you can take care of and clean and maintain, like as part of, again, that morning routine. Is things are not always based on efficiency. It's based on control and presence of what's going on in my day, that I get to have that. So actually having something where I like am proud of it and keep it clean and all these other little bits and pieces just ends up being kind of really nice. And then I'll actually sit with my coffee, and as JP knows, like I can't really have super hot things or really cold things. So I'll pour my coffee once it's done, and then I'll have it sit down, and for probably 10 to 20 minutes, depending, I'll then just sit there with my thoughts. So I'll just basically meditate for 10 to 20 minutes, if not sometimes more. And then I just sit there and I kind of have this little smell of coffee, so that as I'm coming out of my meditation, like I'm now just so excited. Like I'm so grateful for the fact that now I get to like smell and taste coffee at the perfect temperature. And so no matter what then happens with the rest of the day, I've got up early enough that I was able to do all of that without any type of coinciding chaos happening. And then now I get to start from just like a crazy strong point.
Interesting. That's very so here we did a campaign a little while ago, and we still do this campaign called the Goals of 4. So the Goals of 4 for life on life's terms is to wake up in the morning and humble yourself. That could be, I don't give a shit if you believe in the universe, higher power, God, good orderly direction. I don't care what it is. What we say is just ask for help first thing in the morning, get me through. And then at the end of the day, give an affirmation saying, thank God for getting me through this day.
Absolutely,
Right.
yeah.
So though you end your day, you start your day and you end your day kind of giving, your grievances in the morning, or if it is a grievance, it's just basically asking for help. Then anything that is in front of you, you're going to be able to come up with the solution around that adversity, essentially. Then from there, we suggest physical activity. This way you can control that goal seeking within that hour, whether it be push-ups, sit-ups, whatever it may be. And then from there, we say, check your emotional stability, sitting there drinking your coffee. And then after that, being of service to the world, going to your job.
Yeah.
Right. And that fits exactly like anybody who we've seen successful come through this room. You'll always hear them say, these are the things. They actually have a morning routine.
Yeah.
You can't get away from that. And it's pretty amazing and powerful to see, you guys started from a house to the studio, which is an amazing place. It's very nice, in a very bourgeois place in the city, I would say at this point.
Bourgeois.
Thanks, man.
Great word
Damn.
choice.
Moving up in the ranks.
Yeah, man.
It was horrible one time. Just down the street from you guys actually had the Edmonton Attendance Center.
Yeah.
Those kids could have, and those people could have totally used the fucking phone. Every single
Such a weird area in general, though. Like you have these like nicer like residential homes, and then this like industrial strip, and then across the street is now a commercial area that's been zoned, and then a playground.
Yeah.
And you're like,
A few HVAC warehouses.
yeah, and you're just like, this is such a weird, like Edmonton. This is
Need some
Edmonton
pipes.
right
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
In
yeah.
3 square blocks is Edmonton.
It's funny though too, because like everything we need is on that street.
It's actually
Like,
great.
We're like, oh man, I need HVAC pipes. And you're like, there's like 4 HVAC places like right
Yeah.
up the street, right?
We need some treats for some
Yeah, you got
customers.
Refrigerator too. So the supply company just up the street. From
Yeah, yeah. There's so
and then
much
you got
stuff.
donuts across the street.
Yeah.
It's
which is
amazing.
some of the best donuts in the city.
Yeah,
amazing.
anything and everything
Tasty.
you need, man.
Trick for if you do get this mocha,
I just love how we're just like, he's like, I just really need to share this with you. This is super important to me.
a new job for your French press.
Mhm.
We all like cream
Mhm.
with our cappuccino. You heat it up, your cream or whatever.
Mhm.
Throw that in the bottom of your French press, and then slap it. Doesn't matter if it's almond milk or whatever,
Mhm.
and just make it come up and down as much as you
Mhm.
possibly can. You'll see it froth and foam.
Interesting.
Then
That
you
makes
don't-
sense though too.
Then you don't have to
Yeah.
go and buy like.
Well, just
the
keep in
heater and
mind
all
though
that.
too, I have
Brandy.
only ever drank black coffee, whether it's espresso or whatever, because I fast usually till 2, 3, 4, 5 in the
I do the same
afternoon.
thing. Yeah, intermittent
Yeah.
fasting, but I do it for a religious reason.
Yeah.
But also intermittent fasting came to help me with hypoglycemia.
Mm-hmm.
So that really set that back. I was probably pre-diabetic,
Interesting.
and intermittent fasting changed my life with that. So like even when I'm fasting now, I don't get the shakes.
Yeah.
I can concentrate and stuff.
If anything, like more clarity for a lot of people.
Do you still train? Are you still training physically, like with the weights and stuff like that? I mean, you're still strapping, so.
Yeah, well,
'cause
thank
he's
you.
got those guns kicking over
Thank
there.
Not nearly as much as I used to, and I was talking with a few friends in the last even few weeks about how the last 6 months have been, because the last 6 months of 2018 was pretty intense, and just had to bail on a lot of different stuff, including eating as well as I used to, and not being in the gym as much. Like the last few years of business has actually been very challenging because I've always been in the gym, and it's always been a big pillar and anchor for me.
Yeah.
And since starting the business, it was probably the thing that kept me off the ground the most, is because I just didn't have the energy. Stress levels were a little bit higher. I would get sick if I worked out too much. And so it's been probably in the last like maybe 6 to 8 months that, and probably even a little bit longer than that, where I've actually just taken, it's usually been like in the gym and having that strategy working really well. Then it would follow up with nutrition and sleep predicated on how hard I was working, where it's great when you're going to the gym and everything's working out well, but the minute I would get hurt, or the minute that things crazy happened at work and I needed to have a priority set above that, it was just challenging, because then everything else would kind of suffer, because I'd go to bed later, I wouldn't eat as well. So in the last like 6, 8 months, it's just like I just put a massive 100% focus on my nutrition and diet, and then getting sleep. And then there's days or there's weeks that I can go to the gym 4 times, and there's days or weeks that I will not go once. And and this is such a better strategy for me now, and really could have been forever, even in my early 20s and mid 20s, where putting less of an emphasis on that and realizing that the nutrition and the eating is probably always going to be more. There's always going to be a gym day. And a lot of the time when I do go in now, I feel amazing going in. I feel really strong going in, and I feel even better coming out, where that wasn't always the case. And so it's more just like that own little journey with myself of something that's been a huge pillar for me since my late teens to now, and then just seeing how that's evolving, and how it's how I'm adding that to my life without feeling guilty of not being able to do things as much as maybe I once was able to.
That's interesting.
And I feel really good about it too. Like there's a while that I'm like, why? Like I only went to the gym once this week. Like, why do I deserve to feel so good? Right? And I'm like, it's because I do feel good. And the eating portion too is so massive.
Well, I think so. Like I used to fight MMA at one time in my life, and you're so involved in the gym that you don't recognize how drained you really are, and you're just slugging through. And even now, I've gone back to the gym, so I became obese through recovery of addiction, and not doing anything. I just, like you, went to deal with just my addiction in that moment. I needed to really get past using drugs and alcohol. It was killing me at the end of the day. And so now I'm going back to the gym, and I'm starting to recognize as I go to the gym.
Are you going to Evolve, by the way?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I'm there. Johnny Waco's gym. So 124th. Barrio 124 is in there. So once I lose enough gut weight, I'm going to be back at the
I live next to
stuff.
Haas.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Well, we met through Sunny. Shout out to Clinch Fight Shop. This hat I'm wearing today is...
Which is actually super
beautiful
close
hat.
by.
Yeah.
Next door.
Sunny and I are pretty good buddies. We're
That's awesome.
pretty good
I forgot
friends.
that's how we met.
Yeah, it was through Sunny.
Awesome,
Yeah. So yeah, I have been going to Evolve, but I too am finding that if I'm running kettlebells and my cardio fucking done for 2 days, and I'm so we had Kettlebell Keithan on the show, who's been on Rogan's podcast.
Fantastic name.
He's been on Rogan's podcast a couple times now, and he gave me his kettlebell workout, and I'll fucking kill you, man. Jeez, it's awesome. Like, I've seen huge results from it. I'm not saying that I haven't. I probably dropped just 80 pounds because of the information that he's given me.
Congrats.
And I will continue kettlebells. He even gave me kettlebells, right? The whole bit. And then he gives me his dailies, like his daily kettlebell routine that he's doing. And so I get through that. But if I do that and cardio, I'm fucked. Like I'm fucked. I need so much electrolytes afterwards.
Just cramping everywhere. I didn't even know you could cramp here.
Yeah. Well, it's not so much cramping. It's literally, I just feel a dive. But then I also found out that I have a testosterone deficiency. So I'm TRT-able, so to say. So I'm already bald going into this thing, but I'm going to be even more bald and probably come out looking like fucking Dana White and Joe Rogan. Right? Just yoked out with no fucking hair and a hairy ass back. Like that's pretty much what happens.
But I'm strong as fuck, so don't worry about it. Yeah.
Exactly. And feel really good. But when I was tested, I was like at a 5. Like I was like, I was like 50. At 50,
I was going to be like, whoa.
Well, at 50, it's hard to get out of bed, man, because you're so low, right? So when you were saying like no energy and stuff, I was like, fuck, man, if like pumping weights and all that. So the reason why I have testosterone deficiency is from opiates, right? That's my body just, fuck you, son. You know, like you've done enough to us. And I've heard this also with semi-pro and professional athletes. We push testosterone so much that our prostate has a very difficult time responding when we stop putting it to that exertion. And this is why later on, earlier, like we start losing testosterone at 35. But if you start losing testosterone before that, it's probably because you were semi or professional athlete and you're trying to get so much testosterone through your system naturally that your prostate, when you stop working out, it's like, fuck you. Literally
I've been working like my balls off for so many years. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's why, like, here in Canada, we're really lucky where you can go get that all tested for free. Yeah. And testosterone's not that expensive here, really. You have the option of a cream or a shot. I choose the shot.
I was going to say, are you a cream guy?
I wouldn't know, man. I just like every time I see the cream, I'm like, shit, I got to put that on my dick? Like, how the hell does that work?
Where does this absorb?
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Rub it on your taint and shit.
Exactly. Like it's this, yeah. So the shot is better, I think, and so yeah, that's. But like managing. That's also thanks for sharing that story, because that's like it's a struggle of like what's acceptable or it's not, especially as a man, and especially when it comes down to everything from sex to working out to how you look to balding to like it's just there's so many different pressures and things that happen to us in life, right? Well, and I think the kicker is, fuck this show, man. I've shared things that people are just like, what?
Why?
What the hell?
Why be vulnerable around other people?
Kenny, grats to Kenny. I remember he was telling me one time, he's like, he was talking about blowjobs and how he's like, men need a shocker too. As much as girls like it, men need to have it too. I'm like, Kenny, you gotta shut the fuck up. You're just going too far now, you know? So then he wrote a blog.
Should you share? Absolutely. Do you need to share as many details? Probably not.
But then he wrote a blog about getting a shocker his first time and with that experience. I'm like, okay, well.
You know what? You're into this. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm glad that we got more readers. Hashtag men's shocker.
Right? Oh, man.
So yeah, I mean, we're an hour 40 in now, so I'm gonna wrap the show
flies.
up. Yeah, I'm gonna wrap the show up now. I'm hoping that we'll have you guys back in. We're sending Chelsea to you guys throughout this month at some point to go and experience her float. And so
do you have gift cards or anything already for that?
Pardon me?
Do you have things set up for that, or gift cards or anything yet? Okay, we'll get that set up.
We'll figure that out. Yeah, so she'll write a blog about that. That'll be actually attached to this show.
Oh, cool.
So that will be her blog going out for this.
Nice.
And so yeah, thanks for coming in. It was a while actually for us to do it. I think it's just the schedules, right?
Yeah.
But that's a beautiful
Crazy
thing about
schedules.
podcasting, man. I mean, this is, like I said, this is the best job in the world, in my opinion. And I just like to keep the door open for when anybody wants to come in, right? So hopefully one day we'll get Sunny in here as well.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, it would
That'd be a fun conversation.
Right? It would be a great conversation, especially coming from his background with the wrestling and how he
Yeah.
got into floating. I mean, that's
Yeah.
fucking mind blowing, right?
Yeah.
So shout out to Italian Center, Clinch Fight Shop.
Taints.
Yeah, Taints.
Male shockers,
Male shockers.
Evolve Gym, and,
Evolve Gym.
and kettlebells,
And cheese.
and cheese.
All right. Well, to catch the After the Show blog, go to www.lifeonlifestermspodcast.com. That's where you can check out all of the After the Show blogs. You can also get us on Instagram at Life on Life's Terms Podcast, all one word. You can check us out on Facebook, Life on Life's Terms Podcast as well. We're also on YouTube. Anywhere you get a podcasting app or wherever you have a podcasting app, we're also on that app. So go check us out at those places as well. And hope you guys all have a wonderful Thursday afternoon.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for having us.